Thank you for tuning in, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Twitter Spaces event. My name is Miriam Kamali. I lead on Freedom United's campaign to end orphanage trafficking, which tens of thousands of you in the community have taken action on. This has been incredibly inspiring to be a part of. So today I'm speaking to you live from London in the UK to discuss the campaign, why organisations in the tourism industry are important allies in ending orphanage trafficking, and what next steps in the campaign can look like. So, just a bit of housekeeping before we start. This is a live broadcast, but the recording will be available on our Twitter page for the next 30 days. So if you want to listen back, share with your networks and raise awareness, please do just visit our Twitter page and you should be able to share it directly from there. If you would like to speak, to share your thoughts or to ask a question when I open the floor to comments, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you should see a microphone icon, which if you click should indicate that you are requesting to speak. So I'll then go ahead and unmute you to allow you to participate. So to get right into it, some of you might be familiar with our campaign, and for others, you might be wondering, what is orphanage trafficking? Why is this such a big problem? And why are we calling on the volunteerism sector to be allies in tackling it? Volunteerism, as some of you may know, is the term given to the practice of combining voluntary work with tourism, which has become a hugely popular trend. And we've seen a boom in vacation packages that involve volunteer work. And some of you may have undertaken voluntary work abroad as well. So it would be great to hear when we get to the Q&A section what your own experiences were like. But generally, volunteering abroad is a rewarding experience for both volunteers and the communities that welcome volunteer work. Some placements, however, can be actively harmful despite our best intentions, such as orphanage placements. So we might question, what's wrong with volunteering at or donating to an orphanage, particularly if these children look like they need our help. Well, the reality is that far too often fraudulent orphanages appear with children being trafficked into these institutions in order to elicit donations from volunteers from abroad. So, attracted by the funding orphanages receive from donations and organisations offering these kinds of volunteerism placements, it creates an opportunity for traffickers to effectively turn children into commodities by ensuring that there is this almost constant supply of children available to attract funding. So within this context, traffickers know that they are able to exploit a family's perceived lack of options by offering to take their child away, to give them an education and supposedly better life opportunities. Instead, what we're seeing is children are placed in institutions where they're exploited, abused, many are forced to work, and furthermore, at risk of being trafficked again to repeat this cycle and elicit even more donations. What's important to remember is that these are children we're talking about, so children may not always have the ability to advocate for themselves, even if they know that they're experiencing exploitation. So it can take years for the relevant authorities to reunite them with their families. In the meantime, tourists volunteering in orphanages, we may be completely unaware that some or even all of the children there in fact have families that could be looking after them and that may have been trafficked and forced to essentially perform for volunteers visiting an orphanage. Researchers and child rights advocates have uncovered many, many examples of how this occurs around the world. In 2017, it was reported that in Haiti, families had been paid $75 to give their children away. This is significant because in a country where 1 in 4 people lives below the national poverty line of just $1 a day, extreme poverty creates these conditions that drive families to sell or give their children to orphanages on false promises that they'll receive an education, food, and care. The situation in Haiti is replicated across the world. ECPAT reported on cases in Nepal, for example, where orphanage directors have reportedly refused to release children, even where they have been requested to do so by parents. In one case, an orphanage director extorted a mother who believed her 2 children were in school. She searched and eventually located them at his orphanage, and instead of releasing the children to her, the orphanage director insisted that the mother pay him the equivalent of around $1,400 for 2 years of the so-called care at the orphanage. Another example from last year is authorities in Nigeria arrested a suspected orphanage trafficker who had reportedly kept around 74 children in an institution under the guise of fostering them and providing them with an education. It later transpired that at least 11 of the children had in fact been abducted. This is also touched upon in the United States Trafficking in Persons report from 2020 that notes that foreigners sexually exploited children by donating to orphanages or promising to pay their school fees in order to gain access to children. An estimated 5 million children around the world are living in orphanages, despite the fact that 80% of these have at least one parent or family member that is able to look after them with the right support. When we consider this vast number, it's clear that something just isn't adding up. That's why we decided to launch our campaign back in 2018 with a simple request for organisations offering volunteerism placements. Can you remove all advertisements and mention of voluntary orphanage placements on your website and commit to stop funding these placements in orphanages? Over the past few years, the Freedom United community has been taking action, asking the volunteerism sector to re-examine its position on orphanage volunteer placements as the evidence base linking these placements to trafficking and exploitation continues to build. There have been decades of research demonstrating the negative impacts of institutionalization on children's development, which has also seen the child protection sector widely accepting that orphanages just aren't the best place for a child to grow up. With the added risk of trafficking, volunteering in an orphanage is a decision that should not be taken lightly. In fact, we strongly advise against it. The reasons why children end up in orphanages are complex and varied, but work by organisations such as Lumos, the Better Care Network, Next Generation Nepal, ECPAT, and many others has demonstrated the institutionalisation of children and volunteering is creating opportunities for traffickers to exploit. Through her research and her own experiences of volunteering in an orphanage, Dr. Kate Van Dor, a leading legal expert on orphanage trafficking whose work focuses on putting an end to children being exploited for profit in orphanages, urges us all to reconsider volunteering in orphanages and to ask questions. These can be simply, how are you funded? And are you supporting community-based alternatives? Having said all this, fortunately, orphanage trafficking has begun to be formally recognised by national and international agencies as a form of modern-day slavery, perpetuated by the opportunity presented to traffickers in the form of orphanage volunteering. In 2019, we were glad to see a new resolution to the Child's Rights Convention, calling on states to take action to prevent the trafficking and exploitation of children in care facilities, including addressing the harms related to volunteering programs in orphanages in the context of tourism, which can lead to trafficking and exploitation. In the same year, the UK also issued official travel advice warning of the harms and risks of orphanage volunteering. It's really encouraging to see the international community recognising how volunteering in orphanages can put children at risk of trafficking and abuse. But we're still seeing some volunteer tour operators continuing to offer these placements. So where is the campaign now, and what are some next steps? Well, in the past few years, we've worked with Global Vision International, African Impact, and Go Overseas, all organisations placing volunteers abroad, and we worked with them to move away from offering orphanage placements, and we're so proud of their leadership in the volunteerism sector. We each have the power to raise awareness of the harms of orphanage volunteering and call for change. The fact is that volunteer tour operators have the power to bust traffickers' business model by stemming the demand for orphanage volunteering, reducing the incentive for traffickers to ensure there's a flow of children available to keep attracting foreign volunteers and donations. Critically, the pandemic has hit the travel industry hard, and that includes these companies offering placements abroad. But this crisis also presents an opportunity for volunteer tour operators to break the cycle of exploitation once and for all by committing right now to stop offering these placements as we emerge from this pandemic. So let's grab this moment to make sustainable change and ask the tourism industry to join us and become allies in ensuring orphanage trafficking isn't driven by foreign donations and volunteers. I'm now going to open the floor for any questions or comments if any of you would like to share your thoughts. So I believe if you just select the mic icon on your page, it should pop up with an option for me to let you speak. I'm guessing that nobody has any questions at this stage. Okay, we've got one request. All right. Edward.
Yeah, just a quick question as someone who's worked in the kind of global partners space. One of the issues is to be able to show how, when advancing something like this, to be able to show how the issue evolves over time. But that requires kind of regular data, and I would guess that, not knowing anything about it, that sort of any type of official data and regular databases on this would be hard to find. Is that something that needs to be, part of what is advocated for, that this is that these issues are regularly tracked by governments or local authorities? And what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think data that has been collected is, there is some data out there, but of course it's really important to have a map of how this does, as you say, evolve over time. Just last month, children's charity Lumos published a really important report on the global patterns of institutional related trafficking. So I'd say that was a really crucial report, and that does provide that kind of overview globally, which gives us an idea of the extent of the issue and also what governments are able to do in terms of legislation. Thank you for that question. All right, seeing a few others, so I'm just going to go ahead and approve Alan. Okay, Alan, you should be able to speak now. Nope. Okay. Might have lost Alan. Okay, let me try and see if we can get anyone else to speak. Okay, Joanna, I think I should have approved you. You should be able to speak now. Yep, I can hear you. Can hear your mic going.
Hello. Thank you very much. This is Joanna. I am with Freedom United, and I know that one of the questions that we're often asked is whether we're actually against all orphanage volunteering, and whether there's a way to differentiate between orphanages that are involved in trafficking and ones that aren't. And how do we generally respond to that question? Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, that is a really good question, and one that, as you say, we receive often. And I think what's really important to emphasize here is that we are not suggesting that all orphanages are linked to trafficking, and nor are we suggesting that volunteer tour operators who offer these placements, are knowingly placing volunteers in orphanages linked to trafficking either. What we are seeing, though, is that although not all orphanages are engaging in human trafficking, the evidence is clear that institutional care is endangering children, and many orphanages around the world have been used as a front for trafficking, and in the process, tricking, very well-meaning volunteers. So for us, the perspective that we have is that the risk is simply just too high. So we really don't recommend volunteering in an orphanage. Thank you for that question, Joanna. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any other requests to speak. Thank you for bearing with us. This was our first Twitter Spaces event, so thank you for bearing with as we figured out some tech issues. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to learn more about the campaign to end orphanage trafficking. You can get involved in the campaign right now at freedomunited.org and go ahead and write to volunteer tour operators, asking them to take a stand by committing to stop offering volunteer placements in orphanages. As I mentioned, we are really proud to have worked with Global Vision International, African Impact, and Go Overseas. Most recently, Go Overseas have implemented a new system on their site, flagging the harms of orphanage volunteering. And we're excited to share that we will be going live on our Instagram next Wednesday, January 26th at the same time, so 12 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. GMT, with Go Overseas. So tune in to join the conversation there. I'm sure it'll be a really, really interesting one. Bring your questions. And thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. And we hope to see you over on Instagram next week.